already late كده. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه واتبع هداه وبعد. Welcome everybody to our new series on the 40 Nawawi Hadeeth. Today we'll start with reviewing what we learned from Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala. So last time we talked about Imam al-Nawawi and we gave a brief biography about him. And second, we talked about the idea of the 40 Nawawi Hadith. So let's recap what we did, add few points. What do we learn from the life of Imam al-Nawawi? The first thing that I singled out is that we should be seeking towards having a blessed life. Seeking towards having a blessed life. Imam al-Nawawi was known as someone who never wasted his time. Someone who doesn't waste his time. We talked about Imam al-Nawawi as authority in fiqh. And he is a scholar of hadith. And he is also a scholar of akhlaq. He wrote about Islamic ethics. Someone who is authority in fiqh, authority in Islamic law, this is too big. Imam al-Nawawi was an authority in Shafi'i fiqh. When I say authority, I mean it's they say in Arabic, one of the pillars of the madhab. So if scholars of the madhab disagree on any issue, they would go back to the opinion of Imam al-Nawawi. The point is, all of this was done and he died at the age 45. Someone who dies at 40 or 42 or 45, we say he's still young. Imam al-Nawawi died at that age. It's not the years in your life that count. It is the life in the years. It is the life in the years. And this is one Muslim scholar used to say, Allahumma arzuqni hayatan arida wa la tarzuqni hayatan tawila. Give me a wide lifespan, not a long one. Again, it's about the life in the years, not the years of the life. Many of us talk about killing your time. And I'm telling you, killing your time is like killing yourself. Because you are these times. You are a number of days, a number of breaths. As Al-Hasan al-Basri said, we are a number of days. If one day passes, part of us passes. And when part of us passes, the whole is almost passing. So, as I said before, our life is a story. And we are the author of this story. So what kind of a story do you want to leave behind? We know the story of Imam al-Nawawi. Do you think Imam al-Nawawi passed away? This is someone we're discussing till this day. Till this day. So the legacy he left behind gave him another life. And this is another lesson for us. You're the author of this story, and you can decide now what will be said about you after you leave. And that is not riya, that is not showing off. Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam, he is a prophet, and he had a lot of du'as in the Quran. And it is interesting, if you want to do some research, that each prophet has a specific philosophy of du'as. Every prophet concentrates on something specific in his du'a. Sayyidina Ibrahim, you can say that this is the prophet of future du'as. Check all of his du'as in the Quran. It's usually about the future. He made a du'a that Allah brings a prophet for the Arab, and that was the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He made a du'a for his child and for Ismail and for his offspring not to worship the idols. He made a du'a for Al-Ard al-Haram, the sacred land in Hijaz and in Mecca, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses it. It's almost about the future. One of his du'as was وَاجْعَلْ لِي لِسَانَ صِدْقٍ فِي الْآخِرِينَ. اجعل لي لسان صدق في الآخرين. يعني grant me a good mention in later generations. Grant me a good reputation in later generation. As I said, this is not showing up. This is like, guide me to some good deeds that would be a legacy after I leave for people to emulate and copy. So your life is not only these few years that you're living. That is very short. Your life could continue till the day of judgment. And of course, the real life is the afterlife. So add another life to yours by writing a very good story that you're choosing now. This is the first lesson we learn from the life of Imam al-Nawawi. The second is the idea of sincerity. Imam al-Nawawi was known to be a sincere person. And we talked about the idea that most of his books are classics in their subject. And many scholars would attribute that to the ikhlas and the sincerity and the good intention of Imam al-Nawawi. The last thing, he was someone who was concerned about preserving the deen and protecting the deen. He lived at the time of the Mongols who attacked Muslim countries, destroyed Iraq, killed, according to the highest estimate, killed almost 1 million people. Imagine if you're living at that time, how depressed you will be. This is the legacy of someone who lived at that time. If you're complaining about political injustice against you, Imam al-Nawawi lived at a time when he was totally at circumstances and factors that would make him totally depressed. But he didn't choose that path. What he chose was to look at a skill he has, and his skill was seeking knowledge. And he sought knowledge till he became an authority and provided the ummah in different levels. If you are a scholar, he has al-Majmu' for you, a book on Shafi'i fiqh. If you are among the lay people, you're not interested in knowledge that much, and you have another area, he has the 40 Nawawi Hadeeth for you. He gave different books for different levels. And he preserved the ummah at a time when knowledge was lost. So this is just something to keep in mind when we're talking about Imam al-Nawawi. Just to avoid wasting our time, because we have few minutes for the class, so we'll move directly to the first hadith. And this hadith is narrated by Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu. And this hadith is about the significance of intention. Who was Umar? And what the hadith is about. This is our discussion tonight in these few minutes. Umar ibn al-Khattab, his kunya is Abu Hafs. We talked about the meaning of kunya last time. Abu Hafs. The word Hafs literally means a lion. The word lion in Arabic has so many words. One of them is Hafs. But anyway, he was also the first one to be called Amirul Mu'mineen, the commander of the believer, as a political title, because that title was given to someone else also during his lifetime. But Umar was the first one to go with this title as a political title. He's Amirul Mu'mineen, like the Khalifa, like the leader, like the president. But he picked that title. He was born 13 years after the elephant event that we know in the Seerah. He embraced Islam 5 or 6 years after the Prophet ﷺ started his mission as a prophet. He became the second caliph in the year 13th of Hijrah. In the year 13th, after Abu Bakr. And he continued caliph for 10 years. And he was actually killed in the year 23 of Hijrah. Abu Lu'lu' al-Majusi killed him at that year, the 23rd. So he actually lived as a Khalifa for 10 years. As we know, he was known for his justice. Actually, some scholars say, no, justice was known for Umar. It's not Umar who was known for justice, but justice was known for Umar. He narrated 539 ahadith. 539 ahadith. Many of these ahadith are in Bukhari and Muslim. Imam al-Bukhari has 34 hadith. Imam Muslim has 21 hadith. And both of them agreed on 26 ahadith by Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu. Let me move quickly, and as I told you before, you should have your notebook just in case you have to write down something. We'll move to the first hadith right away. The first hadith says, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Actions are but by intentions. This is the literal translation of the first part of the hadith. Actually, the hadith has three parts. Actions are but by intentions, and then وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَّا نَوَى. Indeed, every individual will have that which he intended or she intended. And then فَمَنْ كَانَتْ هِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. Whoever, the one whose migration is for the sake of Allah and His Prophet, فَهِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. Then his migration is for the sake of Allah and His Prophet. وَمَنْ كَانَتْ هِجْرَتُهُ لِدُنْيَا يُصِيبُهَا. The one whose migration is for a worldly benefit to gain, أو امرأة ينكحها, or a woman to get married to, فهجرته إلى ما هاجر إليه. Then his migration is that for which he migrated. As you see, there are three parts of this hadith. The first part is a principle. The second is like the law. The third is an example. We'll go through all of these, but before we talk about the details and the meaning of the hadith, I'd like to talk first about the significance of the hadith in general. This hadith, according to the Imam al-Bukhari, he talked about how much Muslims honored this hadith. Remember when we said last time that Imam al-Nawawi picked 40 hadith based on some universals and essential teachings of Islam. He's not having an anthology or collection of hadith on one topic, like the books, the 40 hadith on the virtues of the mothers of the believers, or 40 hadith on jihad, or 40 hadith on generosity. No, he's having 40 hadith on what? On the basic and essential foundations of Islam. That is why when you study these ahadith, you increase your literacy of Islam. It increases your literacy of Islam. So this hadith, let's see what Muslim scholars said about this hadith. They say that this hadith ليس في أخبار النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم شيء أجمع وأغنى وأكثر فائدة من هذا الحديث. There is nothing in the words of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم that are more comprehensive and more beneficial than this hadith. Some of the scholars used to say that this hadith is half of Islam. This half of Islam is this hadith. How? They said because whatever you do could be something outward or inward. And this hadith is about the intentions. So that is half of our actions is the inward. This hadith is about the inward, so it is half of Islam. Half of the Sharia, half of your practices is about the intentions. And we'll get to that inshallah. Some people said, no, this is 1/3 of Islam. This is 1/3 of Islam. And they have their own also justification. But it's interesting how they think about these universals. So they said, this one is 1/3. Another hadith that the second third would be من عمل عملا ليس عليه أمرنا فهو رد. Anyone who introduces any new practice in the faith that has no foundation is rad, is rejected. That is something to be proud of. Your deen is so protected that no Muslim scholar has the authority to introduce anything in it. And Muslim scholars are aware to detect these opinions. And the third hadith would be al-halalu bayin wal-haramu bayin. The halal is clear, the haram is clear, and there are gray areas. And then the hadith talks about how to avoid and how to deal with the gray areas. Some scholars would say, no, this is 1/4 of Islam. And they would give another hadith as the fourth, which is the hadith about من حسن إسلام المرء تركه ما لا يعنيه. Part of your excellent practice of Islam is to leave that which does not concern you. In other words, mind your own business. This is what the hadith is about. So these are the universals as I talked, as I stressed this point. Now let's move to the meaning of the, actually before we move, Imam al-Nawawi started the 40 hadith with this one. He started Riyadh al-Salihin with this one. He started his book on Adhkar with this hadith. Imam al-Bukhari started his collection of ahadith with this one. They used to start with this hadith to remind themselves of the importance of the intentions. They used to start their actions, their books with this hadith to remind themselves of the importance of the niyyah. Because if you take the niyyah and the intention away from your actions are dead or fruitless, or not counted, or insulting to the one you're worshipping, as we'll see. Let's move quickly again to, there are a lot of discussions over this hadith, like academic discussions, and I'll avoid them and just focus on the things that can relate to us and we can apply in life. Because when you study in big universities and then you start as Imam al-Ghazali, he's a famous Azhari scholar. He said, I studied for years in Al-Azhar, and then after I graduated, I was asked to give khutbas, and then I gave 5 khutbas, and I ran out of ideas. Khalas, it's just 5 khutbas. All of these years in 5 khutbas, and he said, I restarted, and I started reading. So sometimes it's tough to present these hadith in a way that would be very practical, because if you're reading the classical works on these ahadith, they would talk about innama, it's for exclusiveness, and some grammatical issues, and why is this right, and difference of opinions. But anyway, let's minimize that inshallah. But in the process, we'll learn how Muslim scholars think, because this is too big to be a scholar and entrusted with telling people the meaning of the sentences is a big job. And we'll give you a taste of that inshallah now. So the hadith says, actions are but by intentions. Can anyone tell me what you get from this sentence? Actions are but by intentions. How do you understand this? Naam, tfaddal.
The way I understand it is, so how we differentiate between, this is one way to look at it, in terms of a legal perspective. How do you differentiate normal acts versus acts of worship? What differentiates, for example, wudu, or just washing your arm?
Now, what I mean by my question is, forget the details, forget your background, forget what you know about the hadith, and focus on this sentence. If you heard it from somebody, how do you make sense of it? What would it mean to you? Forget any background about the hadith. What would it mean? I mean, I'm talking about basic English. I'm not talking about the deen now. Now, thank you for your answer now. Very good. So the sister is saying it means actions will not be accepted unless you have good intention. This is one way of interpreting it. What she did without realizing is she filled in some gaps, and that is a big science. So the hadith, the sentence means that there is something missing here. Actions are what? And Muslim scholars would say there are 2 ways. Actions are complete or sound. And there is big difference. Actions are complete by the intentions, or actions are sound by the intentions. The majority of you would say it's sound by the intentions. Meaning your actions will never count unless you have a good intention. This is what they mean by this. And the idea of filling in the gaps and looking for what is implied in the text is a big art. Like in the Quran it says, وَاسْأَلِ الْقَرْيَةِ, ask the village. You will not go literally and ask the village. It means ask the people of the village. So this is something you must fill in. based on Arabic rhetoric and things like that. But it's good to know that, and we'll move quickly from these subtle points. So at least a good understanding, a valid understanding is actions are sound by intentions, are only sound through the intentions. Will never count except you have good intentions. Will be rewarded or punished based on your intentions. Some scholars would say, no, you don't need to fill in any gaps. Because what it actually says is actions are but by intentions. Meaning, if we do not have actions, if we do not have intentions, there are no actions. If we take away the intentions from your work, you end up having no actions. That is why Imam Ibn Hazm said, intentions are the souls of the actions. And he said, and this is very beautiful, let me give you that quote. He said, النية سر العبودية ومحلها. So intention is the essence and soul of the actions. ومحلها من العمل محل الروح من الجسد. Intention is to action what soul is to the body. Intention is to action what soul is to the body. So in this way you don't have to fill any gaps. So as Ibn Ata'illah said, الأعمال صور قائمة. Actions are empty forms. And the soul of these forms is the sincerity, the ikhlas. So if you don't have good intention, if you don't have ikhlas, there are no good deeds aslan. The deed itself does not count. Naam.
So how about this, like result of getting God or deed depends on its intention.
Say that again.
Results of any work or deed depends on its intention.
Yes, that is valid too. Naam. طيب, let's move to another point. When we say actions are but by intention, Muslim scholars again would take this word very seriously. What do you mean by intention? And I have problem finding English meanings and translation for the words I will be giving. But they said there are levels of the intention. There is something called hajis, which is a thought that randomly fall into your mind. That is the weakest thing. As we'll see, things will develop into intentions later. But the first thing would start with hajis. It is just a thought that occurs into your mind. You're not judged for these type of thoughts. It comes and it doesn't stay at all. And then we have something called khatir. Khatir is the thought that stays but leaves quickly. And then you have something called hadith in nafs. We have an English word for this, which is your self-talk. Also your self-talk, you're not counted, you're not judged for these three. So self-talk is you're hesitant about things. You're not decisive. It's just something that comes to your mind and you think about it and you make no decisions, no inclinations. And you're basically hesitating. There is no determination on anything. And then we have two levels that are important to us. The first one is called ham, which is like a desire, and azima, which is also a desire. But there is a difference in Arabic. Ham is when you desire something, and you incline towards something with no determination. Azm is when you incline with a determination. Why do we need these things? Because there is a hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, if two Muslims are fighting with their swords, then the one who's killed and the killer will be in hell. people said, Ya Rasulullah, Mashi, the killer is in hell. Why would be the one who's killed in hell? The Prophet ﷺ said, because he was determined to kill his brother. He was determined to kill his brother. You're responsible for your desires if they are accompanied by azima, by determination. And we know from Surah Noon, the people who had that evil plan in Surah Noon, the Ashab al-Jannah, the people of the garden was destroyed without they were able to actually implement the action. But because they were so determined and they planned it very much carefully, they were judged for it. So now what is the intention? The intention is the azima, the qasd, accompanied by the action. When you do something with this, in this way, the intention is your determination accompanied by the action itself. That is why in criminal law, they talk about intent and motive. Right? There is a big difference between intent and motive in criminal law. Intent is your serious planning. You plan to kill somebody. It's, they say, premeditated. So you're planning it. And the motive is the purpose behind it. Maybe you want to kill somebody to get money from the insurance. That does not change the ruling. That does not make you more or less killer. But the intent is the most important thing. In Islam, because you're dealing with Allah, both are considered. So if I am doing something and my intention is not for Allah and my intention is for people, that deed does not count. And that is very scary. That is really very scary. And let's focus on this moral teaching from this hadith. Forget language and all of that. Actions are by intentions. Let me give you some scenarios. Now, your Abu Ish?
Abu Sabra.
Abu Sabra, Mashi, because we're going with kunyas here. So,
if I
Abu Sabras, I saw him doing something, and then I gave him a piece of advice. Is that an ethical act? It looks good, but the thing that determines if it is ethical or good is not what you saw, but is what I have in my heart. This is the intention that no one knows except Allah. If I am advising him, and my intention is to show him that I am better than him, and he will never reach my level, and he's lower than me, and I am superior, then this piece of advice is a sin. You see, there is a huge, it's really scary. If you're standing in salah, and your purpose is to show off so that people will say, MashaAllah, or to impress your would-be fiancé, the wife of your would-be, the parents of your would-be fiancé, if this is your intention, what you're doing is a sin. It looks like salah, but it is a sin. Imam al-Ghazali gave a very good parable. He said, imagine, and he gave this example in seeking ihsan. He said, imagine if you are serving a king, and then as you're serving the king, your intention is to get the attention of some other servants of the king. You're not honoring the king. You're trying to get the attention of some servants of the king. He said, imagine what would the king do if he knew that intention. So this is what you're doing. وَلِلَّهِ الْمَثَلُ الْأَعْلَى. Every analogy breaks. This is what you do when you're standing in salah, thinking that doing it for someone other than Allah. This is how insulting it is. It's not a salah anymore. It's not an act of worship. It is a sin. See how bad intentions turns actions into sins? It's not counted. No, it's counted against you. It's not you lose the rewards, you get sayyat. That is why when we say that this hadith is half of Islam, that is not an exaggeration. if we would go with the classification that our actions are either outward or inward. Imam Ibn al-Jawzi narrates a funny story. He has a book on أخبار المغفلين, a book on stories about crazy people. He said one day we were sitting in a masjid and someone is praying, and people talked very highly of this type of prayer the man is offering. It's perfect. And people were admiring him and talking very nicely about him. So he said, as the man was hearing all of these compliments, he looked back at them and said, and I'm also fasting, wallahi. So this is the idea that it's not about salah. It's literally showing off. So let's move again to the significance of intentions. So with good intentions, number one, we're talking here about the role intentions play in our life and in our relationship with Allah. Number one, why is intention important? Because actions will not be accepted unless you have good intentions. So it's not enough. Your good deed is not ethical unless you have good motive behind it. Second thing, intention would help you sort out what is mandatory from what is recommended. Let me give you an example. You're giving sadaqat, and then in Ramadan you said, I gave like $500 in charity. Can I count them towards zakah? No, you can't. Why? Because when you gave that money, your intention was not about zakah, and you must have the intention for zakah. So all of the money you gave without the intention of zakah cannot be counted towards your zakah. Third, good intention will reveal your tricks in the deen, because people make tricks in the deen, in their practice of the deen. Let me give you an example also about zakah. Someone is having, let's say, $100,000. And he knows in Ramadan he has to pay zakah 2.5% of that money. So in Sha'ban, he decided to buy 2 apartments to avoid paying zakah. Because if you have apartments, you own them, and even if you rent them, you pay zakah based on the money you get from, not on the actual building, but based on the money you make. So he bought the 2 apartments with the intention of avoiding the 2.5%. In human transactions, it's perfect. You don't have to pay zakah. But with Allah, that trick doesn't work. Why? Because actions are by their intentions. Intentions also, intention, and this is number 4, one of the most important points about intentions is that intention does not stop with the action. The influence of the intention continues after you're done with your actions. The influence of your intentions continues after the action is over. What do I mean by this? You know, many people ask this question: how come heaven is forever and hell is forever, and we just lived here for a few years? It doesn't match. The punishment is too big for these few years you're living here. So Muslim scholars say you're being judged, you're being rewarded or punished based on your intentions. Because you have the intention to keep worshipping Allah till you die, till eternity, you will be rewarded for eternity. And you have the intention to disobey Allah for good, and you're determined on that, the punishment is also for good. That is why the Quran says about some people, وَلَوْ رُدُّوا لَعَادُوا لِمَا نُهُوا عَنْهُ. If they turned back to this life, they would do exactly the same thing they used to do. Remember when you were driving on the highway saying, just this time, I wish no police officer would catch me. And it happens every month. So وَلَوْ رُدُّوا لَعَادُوا لِمَا نُهُوا عَنْهُ. If you turned back to life, you will do the same exact actions. Same thing also when on a smaller level, when it comes to your actions, your good deeds in this dunya. The Prophet ﷺ said, إذا مرض العبد أو سافر كتب له بمثل ما كان يعمل مقيما صحيحا. If someone gets sick or is traveling, he will be rewarded for as if he's resident or good or healthy. He will be rewarded for the same type of good deeds he used to do when he was resident or healthy. Another hadith also with the same idea. The Prophet ﷺ said, ما من امرئ تكون له صلاة بليل فغلبه عليها نوم إلا كتب له أجر صلاته وكان نومه عليه صدقة. If it is your habit to do qiyamul layl, praying at night, and then you unconsciously slept, Allah will give you the rewards of qiyamul layl, and your sleeping or your oversleeping will be sadaqah and charity for you. So intentions influence your has bigger influence even after the action is done. So that is, actions are by intentions. I do not want to move from this topic because it's really significant. It's very significant. نعم بعض السلف used to say رب عمل صغير تعظمه النية. Sometimes you may have a small deed and your intention maximizes it. Sometimes you have a big deed and your intention minimizes it or diminishes it. طيب, let's move to the rest of the hadith because we have maybe 10 more minutes. The hadith says وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَّا نَوَى. Indeed, for every individual will get that which he intended. Again, this is the general principle, and then the Prophet ﷺ turned it into a law. Like, this is like part of the constitution, and then the second one is part of your legal of the laws, and then the Prophet ﷺ gave the example of the one who migrated. One of the things we should study is what was the occasion for this hadith to be said? Why did the Prophet ﷺ say this hadith? This is extremely important. One of the dangerous things in hadith is that you do not see the context of the hadith in the hadith itself. And that leads to a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of confusions. So we'll study a hadith that would say, أُمِرْتُ أَنْ أُقَاتِلَ النَّاسِ حَتَّى يَشْهَدُوا أَنْ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. I was commanded to fight people till they testify that there is no God but Allah. But in order to understand this hadith, you need the context. You need the context. You need to retrieve the background information of the hadith. Otherwise, it will be disastrous. Because people here does not mean all people at all. This is what all medieval writers used to say. It's not all people. I mean, in Islam, basically, a Muslim man is allowed to get married to a Muslim lady or to a Christian lady or Jewish lady. Why? To kill her? That doesn't make any sense. The hadith is not talking about all people, but it has its own background that you need to retrieve so that you reconstruct the whole story. Because that hadith was said at one point, so you need to go back to that and reconstruct the context. So this is very extremely important. This hadith, it may not be that important, but it's still important for us. The Prophet ﷺ said this hadith, and he gave an example. This example is about hijrah. Many scholars say that this hadith is connected with an incident. There was a man in Mecca who migrated to Medina to get married to a specific lady. Qais. His name is Qais. So just to put you in this whole picture. What is hijrah? Hijrah is a great action that Muslims did. Hijrah was not a trip from Mecca to Medina and then طلع البدر علينا and people are singing. That was not hijrah. Actually, this طلع البدر علينا is not authentically used at that time. No, it was not used to receive the Prophet ﷺ coming to Medina. It's not authentic. But hijrah is all about sacrifice. You leave everything behind, your money, your family, your wealth, everything behind. And hijrah is also about kind of a social miracle. That is why the Quran in Surah At-Tawbah, when the Quran is talking about the Battle of Tabuk, saying, إِلَّا تَنْصُرُوهُ فَقَدْ نَصَرَهُ اللَّهُ. The Battle of Tabuk was in the summer, needed money, needed people, volunteers. Allah said, if you do not make the Prophet victorious, فَقَدْ نَصَرَهُ اللَّهُ. Allah made him victorious before. And then it talked about hijrah. Talking about hijrah 9 years after hijrah is significant. It's like saying, if you do not support the Prophet, the one who supported him in hijrah will support him today. The one who made him victorious in hijrah will make him victorious today. Again, have that in mind, and then some people are sacrificing their life and their money. They are making history, and then someone traveling and moving from Mecca to Medina to get married to another lady. Physically, it looks like hijrah, but in reality, it's not hijrah. It's for worldly benefit. It's not about sacrifice. It's actually the opposite. It's going to gain specific worldly affairs. So the Prophet ﷺ said, if you migrated for the sake of Allah, it will be counted as migration for the sake of Allah. But if you migrated for a worldly gain or to get married to a lady, your migration is for what you migrated for. The Prophet did not repeat these things again. He repeated literally, your migration will be for the sake of Allah. But for the second part, he said, your migration is for whatever you migrated for. To belittle the idea of seeking the dunya alone. So that hadith is extremely important. Knowing the incident is important. Some scholars say, yes, this truly happened, but the Prophet ﷺ did not have, there is no evidence that the Prophet ﷺ had this man in mind when he said this hadith. And I incline towards this. Yes, the incident is true, but it's not necessarily the case that the Prophet ﷺ is talking about this man who migrated for this lady. There is an educational lesson we learn from this last part of the hadith, which is using examples to illustrate your points. Remember the example of serving the king to show how showing off is bad? That makes the idea vivid and memorable in your mind. If you're standing in salah, it helps you avoid these riya. The Prophet ﷺ had this habit of illustrating everything he has with examples, and also the scholars did the same thing. Let's take some of these examples. There's an example about salah that the Prophet ﷺ said, if you have a river in front of your house and you have some dirt in your hand and you get washed 5 times a day, do you think any dirt will remain? The Sahaba said no. So the Prophet ﷺ said, this is the same thing with the 5 daily prayers. Allah washes off the sins because of them. Again, the idea of illustrating salah as purification is clear here. Many people say, how do we know that Islam is the truth and we have all of these religions? The Prophet ﷺ answers it in a very beautiful hadith, saying what would mean there is one God. This unity of God leads to the unity of the message. And we have so many prophets, not because they are teaching religions, they are teaching the same exact message. God sends down messages. He does not send down religions. And all of these prophets are not rivals, are not enemies. They are actually cooperating with each other to make that beautiful building. So the Prophet ﷺ said in this hadith, the example, my example and the other prophets is like someone who built a very beautiful house and people started walking around that house and they admired its beauty, and then there was a missing brick of that house. So I am that brick. So again, here Islam is not one of the religions you add to a long list of religions you pick one from. Islam, according to Muslims, is the same faith that all of the prophets were teaching throughout the ages. And these prophets were sent to renew this idea of Islam. That is why Islam is not named after a person or a tribe or nationality. It is a verbal noun. Islam means to surrender, to gain peace. So in just one simple parable, you get to understand the story of religions. The story of religion. It's not about religions, it's about messages, and these messages are identical, and these prophets are brothers. That is why, based on this image, we believe in Moses and we're not Jews. We believe in Jesus and we're not Christians. We believe in Muhammad ﷺ and we're not Muhammadans. We are Muslims, people who surrender. That is why this name fits to be the name of all of these messages. So the Prophet ﷺ gave all of these different images that would help you understand the idea. Let me close with another also misconception. There is a hadith, and I'll close with this one. There is a hadith that says that many of you might have read or heard, that a person may keep doing good throughout his life till it is towards the end of his life, يسبق عليه الكتاب, he will accidentally, apparently from the text, would do something bad, and it will be a bad ending, and he will be in hell. And the same thing is true also in the opposite way. He keeps doing bad, and towards the end of his life he does something good, and he's in heaven forever. People, whether they voice it or not, they may think that this is not justice, right? But there is a hadith, another hadith that adds one phrase, another narration that adds one phrase, and this phrase is فيما يبدو للناس. This is based on what appears to people. So yes, there's someone who keeps doing good, seemingly, apparently, فيما يبدو للناس. And this addition is also in Bukhari, but it solves that puzzle. It's not a mystery. If you keep doing good and you're sincere, hopefully everything will end well. And if you keep doing bad and you're determined and no intention, things will usually end in a bad way, unless you sincerely turn back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So again, the idea of the intention is extremely important, as you see. And sorry for talking fast. We have few minutes to cover everything, and I do not want to talk about one hadith in 2 sessions. So we'll finish one hadith at a time, just to make sure that we're moving. Sometimes we may even cover 2 ahadith in one session. طيب, any questions before we leave? No.
So you're mentioning how, let's say you have a bad intention, then your actions don't count.
No.
Let's say for someone who is kind of in between, part of it's good intention, kind of part of it's bad intention, how do you deal with that? Do you
No.
go forward with that?
Good. So if you're doing something purely for Allah, that is absolute sincerely. If you're doing it purely for showing off, that is absolutely bad. What if you're mixing both? That could be also added to your question. You're going to Hajj for a business and for Hajj. These are 2 purposes. Or like me, you go for Umrah and to buy books. I just recognized this problem when I was reading about that question. And this is the dangerous part. You need a sheikh to tell you about the problems you're not aware of. So Muslim scholars would say whatever predominates is what you will be judged for. If it is predominantly about Hajj and business is in the way, there is no problem. Actually, the Quran says that Hajj, one of the purposes of Hajj is business too, when people get together. But what is predominant in your as your motive? Is it Hajj or Umrah? So at least start with the good deed as your major motive, and then anything that comes in your way is not haram. If you also receive compliments about the good you're doing, that doesn't diminish your good deeds or is not a sign that you don't have ikhlas. I do not want to talk about ikhlas because that would be a different topic. But I want to be focusing on the words of the hadith, what they mean, what do we learn from it. But because if we say intention and we divert it into talking about ikhlas, we'll not be able to finish one hadith in a series. طيب, inshallah, we'll continue. We'll take the second hadith in the next week, inshallah, and we hope to see you there. وجزاكم الله خيرا أجمعين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله.